and what are the different kind of test. So far, just a quick recap. We've been covering the different roles within IT, and how do those roles fit together, with the sole intention that we want to make sure each of you understand uh, what is the career path looking for you? What are the different roles? If you are doing development, what are the different types of developers and so on? So we want to make sure each of you understand what that path looks like. Right. So we've seen this many times now. So we want to make sure you understand where you fit in it and what your path looks like. So when it comes to testing, essentially, what a tester does is test the code to make sure that the quality of the code that is being built and deployed is up to the standard. So usually the deliverable would be uh, a report saying yes, all these components, these modules, which were designed, built, and developed by the developers, those have been tested. In some organizations, they would have a requirement traceability matrix, or TM, where the tester will go through each of the requirements to make sure that the requirements have been met and tested as well. Usually, it's very common for the tester to manually test it. And what they're testing it is they'll have test cases. Sometimes there is a test plan. Sometimes there isn't. Depends again on the organization's culture, if they have a test plan or not. It's all those strongly recommended. And the purpose of the test plan is to show what different tests would be done. But essentially, what the tester is doing is making sure, going through each of the list of the test cases and validating that the actual output is as per the expected output. And if the actual output during testing matches with the expected output, we say the test is successful. And if not, we typically log that as a defect, and that defect is logged in Jira. So we heard in previous conversations, Jira is commonly used for Agile as well. And we would triage these defects, right? So if the expected output is not as per the actual output, you create a defect in Jira, and then you triage it. What we mean by triaging is we find out who that defect needs to be assigned to. Is it a defect, and if there are three teams, which team should own it? Or is this a defect because the requirement wasn't met? Or is this a defect because the developer didn't code properly? So who's the true owner for fixing that defect? That's what the triage is. And once it's fixed, we would test it again. So typically, the kind of tests that are done is each developer is responsible for their own testing, for the unit testing in the dev environment. So it's very common for organizations to have multiple environments. So typically, again, depending on the size of the organization, there would be a dev environment, there would at least be a QA environment and a production environment. Usually, organizations would have minimum four. They would have a dev environment, a QA environment, and a pre-prod or a UAT environment and a prod environment. And the reason there are multiple environment is because it helps facilitate multiple types of testing that a tester would be involved with. So the first test that is done is unit testing that is done by the developer. The developer is making sure that there's some kind of quality testing done before it goes to the tester. So they will write the unit test and use JUnit or other tools to make sure they execute those unit tests. After unit testing is done, the testing team, which could include multiple testers, will start doing what we call as the system testing or the system integration testing, where they would validate some of those use cases which were there in the unit testing. They're not only testing each and every component, but how do these components integrate or interoperate with each other? So, for example, if you're building a system which has a front end an application, a portal, and you have some web services and a database. They would test each of those components, the web server, right? Is it working, right? Do all those button works? Is the validation working on the forms? And then test the database side. Is the database storing all the data as it's expected to? Is the query working as it's expected to? Is the expected response and the actual response matching as such? So they would do this system integration testing. Many times there would be external partners involved. There could be a third party who's sending files to our system. So in that case, there could be multiple testing teams, one external testing team involved from the partner and an internal testing team involved from the organization. And both those testing teams would coordinate and do their testing. So that's what we do in a system integration test where multiple systems are involved. Then after the system integration testing is done in the QA environment, then the next testing is UAT. UAT stands for User Acceptance Test. And in UAT, you are doing an end-to-end testing. And usually in a UAT, business would be involved because business will be saying, okay, I'm going to use this application. They would have their use cases and they would participate in that testing. The tester is again validating that the outcome is as expected, but the business user is probably triggering the test or filling out some of the details because they want to make sure this is as expected based on the specs and the design as well. And then once the UAT is done in the pre-prod environment or the UAT environment, then the code is deployed into production. And usually, just to make sure everything is okay, the testers will do what's called as a smoke test. You don't do extensive amount of testing, but you're just doing a black box testing or a smoke test where you're just running one or two test cases to make sure the code is deployed successfully and there are no issues as such. Many organizations nowadays, they will also perform a penetration testing. And the penetration testing is nothing but a security test to make sure that the code that is deployed is secure. Usually, that pen testing is done by someone from the security team because they'll use specialized tools like vulnerability scanners, which is testing if all your ports are open or if there are any SQL injection attacks that can be performed. And they will do all those different kind of testing. So that's a very specialized form of testing, which usually the testers wouldn't do it, but someone with a lot of security experience would do that. So that's why pen testing is typically done by someone from the testing team. A lot of the times, there is also called another test called performance testing. And that's something the testing team would do to validate the non-functional requirements that were captured by the BA or the business analyst are met. Some of the examples of non-functional requirements are the peak volume, the number of concurrent users. Can the system handle peak volume? Can the system handle 100 concurrent users logging at the same time? Can the system handle 1,000 API calls? So those limits that are defined in non-functional requirements, we test for those in performance test as well. Many times there is code deployed, everything goes fine. Then some other project changed some component in the database. So it didn't really impact anything in our project, but one of the tables was just refreshed or some other application was adding a table. So there's another type of test called regression testing, where you're essentially just running the set of tests again to make sure nothing has been broken. So in that case, if you were to manually test it again, it takes a lot of time. So that's why nowadays it's very common to move away from manual testing and automate this testing where you have a test harness and you would define what is the test data and you would execute those tests in an automated way. So instead of you triggering each of those tests manually, test number one, test number two, and logging all the results, the testing automation framework would do that. And in order for that testing automation framework to do that, you need to define what's the expected output, save those in config files, and then it will check what the expected output is uh, against the actual output. And if it's successful, it will say yes. If not, it can even auto create a Jira ticket as well. So there's varying degree of sophistication when it comes to automation testing. There are automation testing frameworks such as Selenium or Cucumber. Nowadays, many organizations will use robotic process automation softwares such as UiPath, Blue Prism, and so on, which will simulate the clicks which an end user would make on a web portal. Let's say if you have an application, a mobile app or a web portal app, and you're supposed to click on certain places, you're filling out some information, you're clicking submit, a robotic process automation or RPA, many softwares fit in that category like UiPath. You can simulate all those clicks and filling out that form. So you can even automate your UI testing as well. So it's very common nowadays for organization to test, not manually, but automatically test their UI as well using UiPath as well. So those are the different kind of tests that a tester would do. And once it's done, then we'll say yes, the software is successfully deployed and so on. The DevOps engineering, that's usually a separate team. Uh, and the DevOps, like Prashant showed in one of the sessions, we would tend to automate that using scripts. AWS has cloud formation templates, which we covered in one of the sessions. A lot of organizations, they want to be agnostic of cloud. They want to make sure their DevOps process works for AWS and Azure seamlessly without making much changes. So there are abstraction frameworks such as Terraform. A lot of organizations would use Terraform, where you'll just have a config change. And with one config change, you can deploy the code to AWS. You change the config, you say Azure, you can deploy the code to Azure. You change the config to GCP and would deploy it to Google Cloud. So there are various tools to do that as well. But usually there would be a separate team. And depending again on the size of the organization, the testing team could be part of the DevOps team as well. That pretty much completes the deployment of the project. And then after that, it's pretty much support roles where you would have a system admin or a database admin or a different administrator who's just making sure it's business as usual, the lights are on. If you have minor changes, the admin would do it for you. Those roles are good to get an entry point, like for those who don't have much IT knowledge. You come from a different background, mechanical engineering or so on, and you want to establish your credentials in IT and say, I know IT, even though your degree was in a totally different field. It's fairly straightforward and easy to get an Salesforce Administration certification. And that way you build your credentials that you know what is IT, you know what is a server, you know what's a report, what's a dashboard, and so on. And that's how you can build your career as well. So with that, we conclude all the different IT roles we've covered so far, all the way from BA to architect to developer to test to DevOps to support engineer. Today's session, you can unmute yourself and ask any question, or if you feel you want to ask any questions related with career path, uh, please use this opportunity to ask questions. If you don't have any questions, then we can move on to the next part of the discussion, where Prashant will talk more about and wrap up his series of all the information that he's shared for AWS. So, any questions anyone has so far?
Hello, this is Vicky Rana here. Shall I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so it is regarding data science. I just wanted to know, how good or for a job prospect, how good is it if we take that course?
So for
That's
data science, typically there are a lot of programming languages. Python is the most easiest, most common. Uh, there is Kaggle, Kaggle. There are a lot of competitions on Kaggle. You can publish your code as well. Most of the time in data science, they're looking for some kind of domain knowledge as well. So if you're working in the retail, because data science involves a lot of algorithms, machine learning algorithms. So if you're working in retail, you should know what is market basket analysis, right? Decision trees and so on. So it's fairly common to kind of build that profile. Usually, if I was you and I wanted to show that background and that experience, there are a lot of books. I personally use Library Genesis, where you can download a lot of books. When I was studying data science, I read a lot of books to look at the cookbooks and recipes just to know what are the different algorithms data scientists use, right? So you'll see decision trees, shade, and different algorithms that are commonly used in retail. Similarly, for finance, you'll find books which will tell you what are the algorithms which use. So for a data scientist, there are two things you need to know. One is you need to have knowledge of one programming language like Python or R. Even if you know one, that is good enough. They don't expect you to be an expert programmer, but as long as you can use a lot of the Python libraries, which may have a lot of the implementation of the algorithms already. The second is you have a good understanding of those algorithms. That's what the emphasis is on. So typically in the interview, they'll ask you what type of problems have you solved in data science? What algorithms have you used? Now, sometimes the interview, they're confused as well. And they would confuse data analysis with data science as well. And data analysis is pretty much, you're running SQL queries. You can use Power BI or Tableau, or you can do visualization in Python. But the kind of analysis you're doing is not really using machine learning or anything. You're just basically processing the data and trying to do that analysis. And sometimes they also call that as data science. But in true, it's really not data science. So you want to make sure that you're familiar with what different algorithms are used. A lot of books are there which you can look to just familiarize yourself. What are the different data science algorithms?
Okay.
Rena, did I answer your question, or I'm not sure? Do you want to repeat your question to make sure I answered it correctly?
I wanted to know that why is the cost so high for that course? Some people are demanding even 1.5 lakhs, etc. So what
Yeah,
is
I
it? What
wouldn't
are we
pay that
supposed to
much
do with
money.
it?
Yeah,
Yeah, outside. I mean,
I wouldn't pay because it's not worth it, right? So if you look at the pay, right, in terms of how much the pay is, you have to look at return on investment. You're paying that much money. Your salary for a beginner, your salary won't be even that much,
okay.
7, 8, 10 lakhs to begin with. So you're paying that much money, and usually it's a ripoff. I wouldn't pay that much because many times I use Edureka. If you have to do it, and if you need a trainer to do it, look at Udemy. They sell modules.
Mm.
Those are very cost affordable as well. If you look at Edureka has a lot of free courses on YouTube as well. Look at books. You can download any book for free from Library Genesis. And most important, even if they provide the training, right, you still have to get your hands dirty on it. So pretty much what they're asked for the syllabus, what it is that they're providing. And if you look at that syllabus, you'll be like, I can find this pretty much, most of it on YouTube, on Udemy, and within the books. So why pay for it? Now, if they're teaching you the machine learning algorithms, usually, it's preferred that you've done a master's degree and you spent a year or two getting to the depths of machine learning. But if they are covering that, usually depends what is the duration of the course, but they typically won't get into the depth of it anyway. So I would be very cautious joining that
So
course
I'm
and
asking this
paying that
question
much
because
money.
even I thought that that's kind of a ripoff because I don't know what kind of role we'll be playing. Is it a machine language or is it an application development or data management or what is it? I had no idea about it, so I was just thank you,
Yeah, no,
thank you.
ask them for the syllabus. Take a look at Edureka. Their pricing is fairly reasonable.
Okay.
It's
And you
right
did
in
it.
the range of like 18 to 20,000 rupees for 40 hours worth of training. I've taken a lot of training. I learned cloud a few years back, 7, 8 years back from Edureka as well. That's how I started my cloud training, because I could done it myself, but it saves time. I don't have to look at all different YouTube channels and everything. So it's a time saver. And a lot of the trainers are industry professionals who are working part-time and teaching the course. So
Okay.
Reka I've used. Udemy is also good, but anything else more than
How does
20,000 for any course, I wouldn't pay for it.
of course, there's no need for it. And how much does Udemy charge you?
Udemy, they have
Okay.
different modules and they have different courses. It could vary from, they have like sale during, like in US, they have long weekends, like there's a Thanksgiving sale, they'll have a New Year's sale and so on. So every few months they'll have a sale, and there are a lot of promo codes as well. But each course is like $13, sometimes $20. Some are 40 to 50, but then during the sale, they drop to $10 as well. So they're fairly reasonable and cost affordable.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions anyone has? There's a question, what is disaster recovery for a cloud? It's a very good question. So many organizations, right, they would have what's called as a BCP, business continuity plan. Uh, and what that means is, right, if you have a cyclone or a flood in a particular data center, then all your applications are impacted. There's difference between an outage and a disaster. Disaster means all your applications are impacted. Outage means one of the applications in your multiple applications that you're providing is impacted because to that application. Maybe disk got crashed, maybe one server cable got snapped, right? But it's very local and specific to the application. Whereas in disaster, it's not specific to one application, but a whole range of applications because there was disaster in the region. But you still want to make sure your applications are supported and running. For example, if it's a banking application, you cannot tell your customer, sorry, you can't access your money or transfer the money because there was an disaster in a region. So in that case, as part of a business continuity plan, organizations will have a disaster recovery environment, and the application, when it's being designed, uh, we would provision for disaster recovery. So if you have a database in one region, you'll make sure that replication is turned on, and you have database log files that are shipped, and those that data is replicated to a different data center in a different region. Could be different part of the country, could be in a different country, depending on what the business needs are. There are two key factors, or two key SLAs associated with disaster recovery. It is called RTO and RPO, recovery time objective and recovery point objective. Recovery time objective means how long does it take to recover for an application to be up and running once a disaster occurs. And a recovery point objective is how back in time you lose that data because there was an outage. So that frequently, then accordingly, that frequently you have to take a backup of your database to make sure RPO is 2 hours. You're making sure that your backup is taking at least every 2 hours, right? So that way, if an outage occurred in that time window, you just lost not more than 2 hours worth of time. So usually organizations would have a DR playbook where they'll simulate those scenarios to make sure that the environment is up and recurring, and they will simulate those tests. Usually, sometimes testing team may be involved, but most of the time they'll have a dedicated team which is not just doing a DR for one application, but multiple applications, and they'll have a DR playbook because it does take few iterations to do that. Many times organizations prior to cloud would use a third party like SunGuard to make sure SunGuard is managing all their DR environments. They would have all the infrastructure and do that. But nowadays, a lot of applications, they'll just provision it because it's easy to do it on the cloud. So that's what disaster recovery is. Thanks, Prashant, for sharing that link. There was another question. Please tell us about SAP architecture data migration. That's a very vast topic. In the best interest of time, I'll just cover it in 2 or 3 minutes. So SAP is an ERP. ERP is Enterprise Resource Planning. It's an ERP software. There are other ERP softwares, low cost being Dynamics 365. But SAP has been there for a long time. So SAP has gone through its evolution, and the SAP architecture, the most recent is supports or is built on SAP HANA. HANA. And SAP HANA is an in-memory database. You pretty much load all your data in memory. So you need specialized dedicated hardware which has 1 terabyte of memory, not 1 terabyte of hard disk, but 1 terabyte of memory where you can load that much data. Initially, SAP was in denial. They thought, big data systems won't work. You need to do everything in memory. So they persisted with their HANA platform. But if it's an old SAP architecture, it's ECC, then it's probably not using HANA. It uses its own Sybase database, or they've opened up. You can use Oracle or other database. But essentially, in SAP, you have different modules like Material Management. You have FI for finance. You have these different modules. Each module has its own reports. Each module has its own data model. They call it as a master data. And each module would have its own UI and the business processes associated with it. So that's what SAP does. They provide a lot of out-of-the-box business processes, which makes easier for you, for the organization, to have a supply chain and be able to build in their suppliers, the invoicing. With SAP Business One, you can do all of it online as well. So again, depends which version of SAP you're using. Latest is HANA, and they will have typically, a database, a middleware tier. SAP has its own middleware tier. Previously, it used to be PI, then it became NetWeaver. Now they have a CPI, Cloud Platform Invocation Engine. So it's gone through its own evolution. So I won't be doing justice to it, and it will be good to explain with a diagram. But if you look at any of the SAP's website, they have SAP Business Technology Platform. And in that architecture, they will show you the architecture, how they're using SAP HANA, how does it integrate with the cloud, and it integrates with AWS. Your data could be on AWS, could be Azure. So they've evolved their architecture as well. In terms of data migration, it depends what are you migrating the data from. But typically, you would export your data from SAP, put it on the data lake or on the cloud, and then wherever you're migrating it to, you can import it as well. So sorry, Tariwal, I didn't answer in depth, but those who are in SAP, hopefully those will give you some of the buzzwords to Google and look at some information, or we can have another session to just deep dive into it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for information.
Most welcome. Anything else? Otherwise, we can move on with Prashant's next session. There's just one more question. We'll cover that. What proportion OS or banking sector worldwide is into AWS or cloud, or they opt for private cloud? So I worked with the Credit Suisse. So it's more on the investment banking side. They were using Azure. They weren't using much of AWS. But I've seen clients, they have both. As you said in one of our previous sessions, nowadays clients, they want to make sure they are hedging their bet. They're not investing too much in one cloud service provider because there are some capabilities which are better in another cloud. So it's very common and typical to have a multi-cloud strategy where you can seamlessly migrate and shift from one cloud to the other. So if you're using Terraform, it makes the migration a lot easier. So it depends. Like Barclays, they use AWS, I believe. Prashant might be able to add that better. He might have more visibility into it, but for Credit Suisse, we used Azure. Prashant, do you want to add, or I'm not sure if you're at liberty to share?
Yeah, Mukesh. So can you please repeat that question? I was not able to hear that properly.
Yeah, the question was, what cloud does usually banks banking sector clients typically use? Do they use more of AWS or do they use their
Okay.
private cloud? I think, private cloud is like sometimes clients use it, but it's more of public clouds that I've seen using
Yeah,
that.
actually, I've been also working with some of Indian banks, and they are currently working with AWS. So I don't think that is any specific to any particular cloud, but it is more on the government compliance rules because there are some regulations defined by national governments that banking data needs to be local to the country. It has to be stored somewhere in the country only, and it need not be stored in the data center outside the country. So initially, like some of the Indian banks had their data stored in Singapore's data centers, but then when Indian government also brought that rule that you have to ensure that that all the banking data is stored native into the country, then they had to do that migration, and now all the countries wherein there is a cloud region available. For example, in India, now we have two regions available, which is in Mumbai as well as Hyderabad. Hyderabad region has been launched recently. I think it's been only a week or so. So, if there is a region available in the country, most likely the banking organization will go with that particular cloud. And if the cloud service provider does not have any appropriate region in the country which is near to that banking organization, its headquarters or its users, then it might not go with well with that particular cloud. So I think that depends if the banking regulations are being followed up properly, or if it is close to the user's location or company banking location, then they have to prefer accordingly.
Thanks, Prashant. In Credit Suisse, they are headquartered in Switzerland. Switzerland has similar data locality laws that any data that is for their Swiss customers or it's belonging or originated over there cannot leave the country. So that's where we use data virtualization tools like Denodo, where you have some of the data in Americas and then you cannot move the data from Switzerland. So then we virtualize the data, make sure it looks as if it's in one place. I'll just mention in terms of private cloud, a lot of clients they will for like Azure, they have Azure Stack, which means you can have your own hardware, but a lot of the platform as a service capabilities would be installed on your hardware. So you have like your own private cloud, but you manage the infrastructure and some of the security as well. So that client responsibility model is slightly different when you have your own private cloud, but the cloud service provider is managing some aspects of it as well. In healthcare, it's very limited use cases I've seen it, but mostly organizations nowadays, they have no problem going on the public cloud. They would make sure that it's secure. They would use something called as a cloud access security broker, CASB, like Zscaler, and there are a lot of other solutions which provide that additional degree of security and isolation to make sure your data is secure, because that's usually the reason why they want to put it on prem. So with all those solutions now out in the market with privilege identity management and so on, I find less and less clients asking or having the need to put it on prem, and they'll just put it on cloud. Any other questions? Think I've answered all the questions that were posted publicly or privately. If not, you can still post questions. Uh, Otherwise, we can get started for our next session. So over to you, Prashant. Please do
Yeah,
ask
thanks,
questions for
Mukesh.
Prashant as well, because this is his last session. So I want to personally thank Prashant. I've learned a lot from Prashant in these sessions. So Prashant, thank you for all the sessions that you've conducted so far.
Thanks, Mukesh. Thanks everyone for joining this session. And as this is our we'll summarizing all the AWS services that we have covered so far. So do feel free to chip in, unmute yourself, ask any questions, although we have already started answering questions. But going forward, it would be, better if you could ask all the doubts or clarify anything that you have. So I'm sorry, I think I brought up the wrong presentation. Let me Just allow me a minute. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So today we'll be summarizing, covering all the AWS services that we have covered up so far in the previous sessions. And then you can keep asking your queries whenever you feel like. And then at last, as requested last time, we will see a little overview of Docker containers. We'll do a little demo so that you'll be able to understand what is the difference between a traditional app and a Docker app. So let's start with the EC2 cloud service. That is one of the basic services that we covered from the initial sessions. And EC2 is a service that basically provides virtual servers on demand. So if you want a server, you can just go to the EC2 dashboard. You can provision your own server on demand on the capacity that you require as per your business use case. So as you see here, instance types. So these are some of the instance categories that are generally available on the dashboard. So for example, if you are a gaming company and you are more into compute than if you have compute intensive applications, then you would prefer the compute applications. And if you have a different scenario, you want memory intensive applications, you have applications running in the background that requires more memory consumption, then you would go for the memory optimized instances. And there is a way also that you can identify, because if you look at the naming convention, which is C6G, which means C is for compute optimized, 6, 6G means it is sixth generation, and G is uh, basically means Graviton. Graviton is a new kind of processor that is native to AWS only. And if you look at the C5A, which means compute optimized fifth generation and AMD processor. So this is how the naming convention is. And if we look at the memory one, then it starts with R, which means RAM. So again, the naming convention would be same, RAM sixth generation and Graviton instance. So based upon this naming convention, you can easily identify whether if it is a memory optimized or a compute optimized instance. Then there is a general purpose category which offers general compute and memory, uh, general proportion of basically compute, memory, and networking capabilities, bandwidth as well. We have other category which is storage, and this particular category is for your heavy databases. If your business use case or application is more into storage, it uses heavy storage in the background, then this is the category that you need to go for. And then one of the section is accelerated computing, which is also known as high performance computing. If you have very intensive demand for high compute, then these are some of the instances that you need to prefer while going for such use case, right? Then we also have a couple of purchase options available on the EC2 service. So as I have already mentioned that EC2 provides you virtual servers on demand. So then the first category is on demand. So whenever you want any server, you can just go to the EC2 dashboard and purchase a virtual server and start using it. And there you will be paying the cost on demand, which means you will be paying the cost for the amount that you will be using the instance. If you are using that instance for 2 hours, let's say, then you'll only pay for 2 hours. But then we have another category of purchase option, which is reserved instances. What is a reserved instances? There is no difference between as such in between on demand and reserved instances. The only difference is that there is some commitment in RIs. We also call it RIs in short term. And what is that commitment? If you go to a shopkeeper and you purchase a same item, or like every day you go purchase the same item, then after a period of time, let's say 2 or 3 months, you feel that I have to purchase this item continuously every day. I want it for maybe a year or two. I am here living in this society. Then let's make a deal with this person that I will be paying you some I will be paying you some reservation fee, which would be a commitment fee. And then I will just you just give me that stuff daily on the basis. So this is again the same deal that you're making with AWS. You are there are various options available like no upfront, all upfront, partial upfront. So if you go with the all upfront option, then the reserved instances basically help you save up to 70% of the cost. So it then in that case, you will only be paying 30% of the cost and you will get 70% of the savings. So reserved instances is a saving option that you can use. So for example, if you have 1,000 servers in your inventory and you know that your 1,000 servers are going to run for at least 5 years, so then you can purchase some reserved instances either for 1 year or for the 3 year period. The longer you purchase, the more discounts you get. So RI is just a discounted version of on-demand instances and nothing else. Then we have spot instances. Spot instances are also virtual servers, just like these servers. The only difference between spot and other server is that uh, it provides 90% savings, but the condition here is it is available on bid. So just like bidding in real lifetime, you have to bid a cost for the spot instances, and you get that spot instance after you after you pitch the highest bid. And but the critical point here is that if somebody else bids higher amount than what you had done, then it will automatically be taken away within 2 minutes of time. So this is not generally preferred for your production workloads, for your critical workloads, but this can basically help you if you have fault tolerant workloads that can bear the fault tolerant. It could be like if you're testing some CI/CDs, you are deploying some test big data architectures wherein like you don't have you're just performing some POC work that is fault tolerant. So under such circumstances, you can use spot instances. Why? Because you don't want to pay 100% on-demand fee, rather just pay 10% of the fee and use spot instances. So that is the difference between each of the purchase option. So any question so far on EC2? Do let me know. Do unmute yourself or you can even paste that in the chat box. Okay, I will take that as a no. Then we also covered some of the serverless services in our sessions previously, wherein we talked particularly on Lambda functions, and we talked how Lambda function help you execute your code without provisioning any servers in the background. So if you have to execute your Java or Python code, then you need not provision a Java runtime. You need not install Python runtime in any particular server. You just need to write your code, make it available on Lambda functions, and it will do the execution for you by managing the servers, by managing the background runtime for you, and you will automatically be able to get the output, and you can use that output, even integrate your Lambda functions with other services like S3 storage and other as well. Then we have other serverless services, which are Elastic Container Service and Elastic Kubernetes Service. So both of these are containers, are service which are related to containers. And there is a specific platform which is known as Fargate. So Fargate is the platform which offers serverless services for both of these services. So both of these services have two options: either run it on servers or you can even go serverless. So the option that helps you go serverless is the Fargate option. So with the help of Fargate option, you can deploy both of these services, both of the manage your containers across serverless architecture. Then we have API Gateway. API Gateway is a service that helps you write your own APIs. You can deploy your serverless websites using API Gateway, and that won't have any physical, any servers that you will be managing. But whenever there will be requests hitting those API gateways, they will automatically go to a particular server in the background and would get execute the code will interact with the respective services and bring back the output and will communicate further to the requester. So that is how these serverless services do function, and we'll be looking on a Docker container scenario later in the section, and you'll be able to at least understand what is the difference between a containerized application and a traditional application. So any question on serverless from anybody? Okay, I will take that as a no. Then we also covered some of the storage services during our various sessions, wherein the first storage service is relational database service. So relational database service offers SQL databases like Microsoft SQL, PostgreSQL, MySQL databases. There are options like Aurora database. Aurora database also offers you both the options, MySQL and PostgreSQL only, but the only difference is that it is managed by the backend infrastructure is managed by AWS, not you. So yeah, I think most of you must be aware if we talk about relational database, so it is basically related to SQL databases only. So on SQL databases, you can easily perform your analysis, you can query your database tables, and basically the database is in the tabular format. But when we talk about the NoSQL databases, then we also have a couple of databases, out of which on AWS we covered the DynamoDB. DynamoDB is a kind of like non-relational database, which is also a NoSQL database, which does not work on SQL queries, but it is a non-relational database that is highly scalable and also highly available. So I think we also covered DynamoDB during one of our sessions, and we then also covered S3 object storage in our Lambda sections, wherein we saw how we can integrate our Lambda functions with S3 objects and can perform triggers. For example, whenever we are uploading any object for a media, let's consider a media file. It could be an MP3, MP4 file that we're uploading to S3 object. And then that uploading will automatically trigger a Lambda function. It will do the processing of that object, convert it into the required size, and then it will move that object to a different bucket by creating a new bucket and will delete it from the previous bucket. And then we also looked at other use cases wherein uh, we will upload the object and then we try to host some static website, and will we can do like uh, and yeah, S3 object storage is basically a random storage. It is not like a database storage wherein you will get the data stored in a tabular format. Rather, uh, object storages are basically meant to accumulate to store your random objects. And random objects could be your file, it could be your images, videos, or anything that is an object, that is an uh, digital object basically. And when we launch our EC2 instances, then always on the background we have our elastic block storage working, which is also known as volumes. So whenever we are provisioning our virtual servers, we are attaching a 10 GB hard disk. So that 10 GB hard disk is a elastic block storage that is giving us required capacity for our root volume, and also also some amount of storage to install our new applications. So that block storage that we are using to basically manage our operating system and initiate our virtual server is known as elastic block storage. So any query or any clarification required on any of these items from anybody? Okay, cool, fine. Then one of the important topics we covered was AWS networks and subnets, wherein we saw how we can provision networks, uh, and basically VPC is a service that helps you create your networking on AWS. We saw how we can create networks, how we can distribute and further create sub networks within the network. And okay, there is a question. What is considered most efficient type of databases? So Sindhu, to answer your question, it is specific to your requirement. If you are if you're into basically kind of retail business, or if you are managing some stores, or you have basically relational data in the background, then you would go for the relational databases, which could be MySQL, Microsoft SQL, or any SQL database. But if your requirement are more dynamic and cannot be fulfilled by the relational databases, because relational databases have a limitation that they can store your data in form of tables only. They cannot go beyond the tabular format and create more dynamism in storage of your content. So then we have other databases available which are NoSQL. We have Cassandra database. I'm not talking particularly of AWS. We have Cassandra database. We have Redis, which is also an in-memory cache kind of database. Then we have HBase, which is the HBase is one of the databases which is used in big data. Then we have a lot of database options. We also have a graphical database which is known as Neptune on AWS Cloud. We have DocumentDB. So based upon your requirement, what kind of management do you want to do in the background? You have to decide. You have to do a kind of analysis, evaluation. Then you have to go with that particular database. All right. Yeah. Then particularly on networks and subnets, we looked on what is CIDR. So CIDR is basically classless inter-domain routing, where we particularly define a range, and through that range we basically create our subnets and networks and subnets, wherein we get a range of IP addresses assigned. For example, if we are creating a range of, let's say, /24, then we are getting around 250 IPs per network, per subnetwork. And if we are creating a network of, let's say, /16 range, then we are getting more than 65,000 IPs within that network, and it can a huge architecture in that, huge resources or huge IP addresses, huge and cloud or resources in that particularly network. Then we saw what is Internet Gateway, which helps us open up the connectivity to internet through our networks and subnets. Then we also configured route tables, wherein you can navigate your traffic through various subnets and networks. You can even enable peering between two different networks, and even route the traffic bidirectionally through the route tables. So we looked into both of those. And then we also performed VPC peering, wherein we connected one network to another network and played with the traffic live by pinging, by seeing that the traffic generated from the instance one, which is belonging to the network one, is able to communicate with the other server that is currently deployed in the other network. And they are also able to receive the pings and all the requests that are going here in from back and forth. And there was a question from Anubhav on this networking only. So let me answer that. How many VPC and subnets we can have in one availability zone? Okay, so that is so you can have 5 VPCs in a network. I mean, in a region basically, and subnets is basically specific to an availability zone. You can only have, if you have created a VPC, then and you are distributing a subnet, I think you can have one subnet in an availability zone, but I think you can have more. We can check on that part. I'm not sure about the subnet part, but it is 5 VPCs in a region. Yeah. Any more questions on this?
Prashant, I would like to ask one more question on
Yeah,
this topic. I was a little confused about the NAT gateways. I tried actually, I created a VPC. launched EC2 instance, and everything I followed from your lecture, and I mean, it helped me immensely.
Mhm.
I just want to know the role of NAT gateways in detail, if you have time.
Sure.
Thank you.
I will explain you the NAT gateway, and Mukesh, please feel free to add in if I miss upon some details. So NAT gateway is basically, the full form is basically network address translation. So the purpose of NAT gateway is that if you have some private network in your basically, let's say the multi-tier architecture that is generally deployed in companies, they always have a private subnetwork which hosts their databases. So all the content, all the information that you're storing in your databases is very, very secure, because you never want your database information to leak out or to become victim of any external attack. So for that purpose, you use NAT gateway to basically protect all your private resources that are there in your company's network. So what network address translation does is, the outside traffic, for example, uh, somebody is trying to reach out your network from outside. What I mean by outside is internet traffic. But then when it will hit the gateway, NAT gateway will not present the public IP of your private resources to that particular traffic. It will become a middle layer. It will take the traffic from internet and then pass on to your private resources in a secure manner. So, which means that if I want to talk to you directly, I cannot talk to you. Now there is a person in the middle, which you can call it as a bouncer or any security person or a watchman. That traffic has to come through watchman. And if watchman, when it comes to watchman, then it is the responsibility of watchman to ensure that confidentially that particular traffic is reaching to that required person without the person who was trying to reach out from internet, like he should not be able to know where did the traffic go when it hit the NAT gateway. So what happens is, NAT gateway talks to the private resource through the private IP. There is no public IP assigned to the private resources generally whenever there is an architecture deployed in a multi-tier architecture, or in a production environment. So NAT gateway is that layer which uh, maintains that confidentiality and secrecy of communication between public and private resources. So Mukesh, feel free to add if you want to add any point to that.
Yeah, so one of the use cases is, right, there are a couple of use cases. One of the most common use cases is, let's say, I have a server and I need to get data from an external API. So in this case, the directionality of the data is that you have traffic initiating from a private subnet going out to the internet. So as Prashant was saying, you don't want to expose that private subnet, which has your EC2 instance and your database probably as well, to be exposed to the public. So you need a layer of abstraction. So any traffic that is needs to go out from your network, from the private subnet to the internet, it's going out to the internet, it's going and fetching the data. Then in that case, that private subnet will call a NAT gateway, which is in the public. And then from that NAT gateway, the traffic will go out to an external entity, make request that data, get the response back, and come in. So that way, you get that additional layer of security to protect your private subnet, because that traffic is routed through NAT gateway. So another use case is many times, right? If it wasn't AWS, we would call that as a reverse proxy, right? So let's say I have a database server. I want to do a patch on it and I want to update it. So in that case, it has to connect to a server and update itself. So again, the traffic is it's initiating a request from within the network and going outside. So you need something called as a reverse proxy to secure that traffic. So NAT gateway is kind of playing that role.
I hope that
Thank you.
answers
Thank you,
Ankur.
Mukesh. Thank you, Prashant.
And
Yeah.
thanks Mukesh for adding the other part. I actually completely missed on that. Thanks for adding that. Yeah, then moving ahead. So then we had a dedicated session on automation, wherein we covered AWS CloudFormation and talked about how we can deploy our infrastructure through the code, and we can even manage our environment through operations as a code, and we can write our automations as a code and actually deploy them just by writing the JSON or YAML templates in AWS CloudFormation. And this is a very practical session. So I think I've already shared the template with you all. Would request you all to try that template, deploying that template at your end. And do feel free to reach out to me in case if you face any issues deploying that. And that way you will be able to actually learn what is the automation and how does that actually help. So any doubts on automation or on cloud formation from anybody? You can even reach out to me on WhatsApp later if you, while trying to deploy, you're facing some issues. NACL. Okay, so Rashmi asked, can you please explain NACL? Okay, Rashmi, I will explain you NACL when I go to the dashboard, cloud dashboard. I will show you live what is NACL. So any more questions on this? Okay, then moving ahead. Yeah, so I think now we have come to the section uh, wherein we can talk more about Docker containers, and we can see how traditional apps and containerized applications are like, what is the basic difference between both of them? So this is just a high level difference wherein a traditional application is just like this. You have a big, huge server, and over which, let's say you deploy a big operating system, and then over that particular operating system, you basically deploy an application. So this is also known as kind of monolithic approach. But then what is containerized approach? You have the same big server, it could be a physical or virtual, but then within though that particular server, you have four different operating systems which are running, over which you have your own applications running along with their own environments integrated. So you can see that here I have four applications within in the background. I have the same physical infrastructure, and here also I have the same physical infrastructure, but I only have one application running. So this was the traditional approach, but now with the help of Dockerized approach, we have more flexibility, and we can create more fault tolerant workloads. We can create more highly available workloads. So now I would go to the dashboard, and let's do some live session. But before that, let me answer Rashmi's question. What is NACL? So NACL is a VPC item. So I think I have a NACL already in place. So network is network ACLs. It is just like security group. So NACL is also called as stateless firewall. So what is a stateless firewall? So stateless firewalls are that do not maintain states. And for example, if it is a firewall, then you will understand that you have to create some inbound policies as well as outbound policies. So in inbound, basically you just allow me a minute. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so in network ACLs, you basically define your inbound rules as well as outbound rules. So, and your network ACL is basically protecting your entire network. So if I were to explain you practically, so let me open this paint. And so let's consider that this is my network, and I have a few subnets within my network. This could be my first tier and this could be my second tier. So I have web layer or I can have database layer, and this is my network. Now, what I am trying to explain you is that I have this is my, you can consider that this is the place from where the network, the outside traffic can communicate with the network resources. And I have a network ACL present here. So you can understand that all the traffic that has to come inside will come through the firewall. So as NACL is known as stateless firewall, so what does NACL do? NACL basically creates an inbound and outbound rules. So in inbound, you basically define what kind of traffic from outside can come inside. And in the outbound rules, you basically define what is the internal traffic that can go outside. So you have to define those rules. And once you set up those rules, you the required traffic comes in and only the required traffic goes out. So this is just an exercise to maintain that the right traffic is traversing back and forth. So you can, if you want that from outside, you also have to give some priority. So if I'm giving 10, so this rule will be processed first. And if it is having 100 rule, then this rule will be processed as last. So I can define my own traffic, which could be like, let's say custom TCP, and I can say like if port range is, it could be like 6500. So any traffic that is TCP and trying to hit this range of port 0 to 6500 and is coming from internet, this means internet. So allow that traffic and I can save it. So now my first rule is allow any traffic that is trying to hit this particular range, is a TCP traffic and coming from internet, just allow the traffic and it will be allowed. So this is just a firewall that you're configuring for your network. And the difference between NACL and security group is that NACL basically protects your network and security group basically protects your EC2 instances. So both of them do the almost the same thing, but if security group is stateful and they basically protect your resources, not the entire network, right? So I hope that answers. Okay. So yeah, then let's come to an EC2 and let me showcase you a small demo wherein you will be able to understand the basic difference between a container, between a normal application. So we will do a short demo today, wherein we will deploy a web server and we'll first deploy that web server through a normal Linux instance, and then we'll deploy the same web server through a containerized application. And then that way you'll be able to understand what is the basic difference between both. So let me launch an instance. I can call it as my web server 1. I will look for an Red Hat AMI. I've chosen my AMI. I will choose my instance type, which will be general purpose T2 micro. I will create a new key pair. give it today's date for December 22. Okay. I will keep other settings as default only and launch the instance. So here I have got my public IP. I will try to connect the EC2 instance using the terminal. So it's asking me for the username. So I will just put the EC2 user. So successfully now I am in. I will become the root user and now I will install the Apache web server through which I will deploy a basic website. So if I need to install Apache web server, I need to type yum install httpd. So httpd in Linux is known as Apache web server. I will press enter. Now it will look for the Apache package across these repositories and will pull down the package from whichever repository it identifies. Yeah, so it is asking me that it will install Apache. It will also install further dependencies as well. So it's asking me for yes or no. So if I give yes, it will download the package and install them. Now I successfully have my Apache package. Let me validate that. Yeah, so now I have my HTTPD package, but right now it won't automatically start the website. I need to start the Apache service. For that, I need to do the same command that I've even like also showed in previous sessions as well. So through this command, systemctl, which means system control start HTTPD. And you can even enable the service, which means if you enable the service, it will automatically come up if the server restarts. And now let's see if our website is basically working or not. So I need to put it HTTP instead of HTTPS because we don't have any security certificate. So now you see my website is working fine. Right, so we have successfully deployed a website using a virtual server. So now what was that? Let me open the paint again. So let's see what is that we have done so far. So we deployed a virtual server and then which this is a virtual server which has one operating system, which is Red Hat Linux. Okay, and then we further deployed one web application, which is Apache. Right? So we did all of these, and this basically resonates with our architecture that I talked about initially. So this one. Now let's try to deploy a containerized application, which will do the same thing, which will also deploy a website only. But then let's see how that is going to be different. So now on the same instance, what I will do is I will install Docker. So for Docker, you also need to do the same thing. Okay, so it's telling no Docker package available. So I think it is saying because some of the repositories are not enabled. Let me check. Yeah, some of the repositories are in disabled state. So we need to enable this extra repositories because these extra packages are basically pulled down from extra repositories. So I will have to config manager enable. Yeah, so now my extra repository is enabled. So if I will do the same command, now it will be able to download. It's asking me for yes. It's taking some more time. Let's wait. Only 6 more steps remaining. Yeah. So now Docker is successfully installed. So if we will check if Docker is installed or not, we can type Docker info. So yeah, just like we started the Apache service, we need to start the Docker service first. And let's also enable it. Now if we'll do the Docker info command, it should be able to tell you all the details. So here it is telling us that currently we don't have any containers running. It is showing 0, running 0, pause 0, stop 0. There are no images, and it is showing you other details as well, plugins, and then kernel version, operating system, CPUs, memory. So right now, my current virtual server is having this much memory free. And yeah, other details is okay. So now we have successfully installed Docker. Now Docker can help us deploy containers. And the concept is basically same. We have images in Docker as well. And what we call EC2 in AWS is known as containers in Docker. So there are a couple of commands, but before that, let me show you Docker architecture. So this is Docker architecture. So there are some of the client commands that we can use to perform Docker operations, which is like Docker build, Docker pull, Docker run, and through which this is basically the Docker service that we have installed. So when that command will hit the Docker service, it will basically check if we have images internally available or not. And if the image is not internally available, then it will go to the Docker registry, pull that image internally, and will deploy a container. And that will be our application. So the difference in Dockerized application is that it creates a container, it creates the application with all of its dependencies, with libraries and all of its environment pre-configured. So it is a complete package that we will look how. So let me attempt this command docker pull and try pulling an image from registry. So let me pull the docker pull httpd only. So now you see it is pulling the command from where docker registry, which is registry dot no. So later it is pulling from this particular registry, which is docker.io library httpd. So this is a web URL from where it pulled down this image. Now if I will look at the docker image ls, I have one image available here, and this is my Apache image. Now let me deploy a container out of this image. So the command to deploy the container is itd. I will have to specify port that I will explain you in some time. but let me give 80 so that I'll be able to explain you. And I can use my image ID. So the context here is I am using docker run command. -itd means interactive, terminal, and detached mode that you'll be able to understand in some time. And then I'm specifying that use this port, map the 80 port of the server to the 80 port of the container, and use this particular image to deploy the container. Now I will press enter and it will give an error. What error it is giving? It is telling that this particular bind already in use. Why it is telling so? Because currently we are using our 80 port to deploy our website that is deployed here. So it is also using HTTP port, right? And you can only use one port for one thing, not for multiple things. So what we need to do here is change the port. So let's give an other port here. And now our container is running. Let's do a docker ps. Docker ps is a command to check all the running containers. So it is showing that I have one container running, which what it is doing is that all the traffic that is coming from internet is hitting the 8080 port of the server, not the container. It is hitting the 8080 port of the container, and then it is further getting redirected to the 80 port of the container. So this 80 port is of the container, this 8080 port is of the server that you're seeing here, and this is the traffic that is coming from. So now how to check if the website is working or not? The website that is deployed in this container is working or not. So the option is to hit the 8080 port of this server, and automatically you'll be able to understand if the website is working or not. Then go and copy the same IP address, go to another tab and put 8080 at the back. I also need to do HTTP. So yeah, it won't open because there is one more thing that we need to do is because we have not opened 8080 port in the security group, and that is what we need to do. So I think this is a good exercise how which you will be able to understand that if I need to come to the security and if I look at the port, only 80 and 22 port are open. So let me go to the security group and also try open 8080 port. Let me type in here anywhere, save rules, and then let's refresh this page again. Yeah, so now it tells it works. So when I hit the 8080 port of the same IP address, then the website that is currently deployed by the container is opening up. And what is happening on the other page? This particular website is being hosted by my virtual server, not the container. So now you see, this is how we can even deploy the same application using containers. Now, what is the difference between both of them? So if I were to show you the images ls, yeah, so if you were to look at the image size, it is just 145 MB. Okay, and now what we had to deploy, like when I had to deploy this particular EC2 instance, which is here, I had to uh, take T2 micro, which is offering me, I think, 1V CPU, and then it is offering me, I had to also assign a 10 GB of hard disk to the virtual server, which is quite huge in terms of 145 MB. And then there is also 1 GB of memory that I got along with this deployment. So if I compare this amount of uh, resources with what I have used to deploy a container, it is very, very less. Now the size of my Docker image is only 145 MB. Now let me go inside the container and check what is there internally. So we can even log into the container by, there is a command docker exec, which means docker execute -it. We have to give the container ID and then we have to give the shell. Sorry. Yeah, so now I am inside the container. You see, till then I was on this particular server which had this private IP. Now, as soon as I logged into the container, I am in a different environment altogether. So let me check what operating system it is. So if you look here, it is Debian GNU Linux 11. Okay. So it is telling me that it is basically Debian GNU Linux and the version is 11. And what was the operating system here? The operating system here was Red Hat. It was, if I will open the same file, it is different here. And here it is telling me that I have a different operating system, which is Debian. And then if I do a ls, then you'll be, sorry. Yeah, so right now I'm in my local repository, sorry, local directory, which is hosting my Apache 2 configuration. And here I have all the config files for my Apache. So you see, I have all the environment pre-configured. I have my operating system pre-configured, and within just 145 MB of size, I have deployed a container that is hosting my web application. Now just imagine if you can deploy your applications in a containerized format that are taking so less resources in the background, you can easily deploy multiple containers within a single virtual server, and that will give you high availability. Like there is also an option of high availability which is known as Docker Swarm. We won't go into that as that for today. That is an advanced concept, but through this you can at least understand. Let me exit from here. And yeah, and the other advantage of Docker is that it is a kind of use and throw model. So if this container gets killed for some reason, then automatically within a span of seconds, another container can pop up and take up its responsibilities. Wherein if your instance goes down, the web server which is hosting on EC2 instance goes down for some reasons, then it will take at least 10 minutes or 15 minutes to bring a new instance up, configure that. Even if you have all the automation in place, it will take around 10 minutes to bring that ready. But it will only take a span of seconds to bring a container up. If your primary container gets killed, automatically the other container can take up the responsibilities and continue to host your website. So I think all of you were able to understand what is a containerized application versus a traditional application. So let me know if you have any questions on this.
Prashant, what you just said regarding the failure of one of the containers, you said that the other one will take up its place. So is this one of the examples of disaster recovery that Amazon is taking care of?
No, it is not specific to Amazon. Actually, Docker is a company in its own. So Docker
Okay.
has brought up this technology, which is not specific to AWS, but AWS is also using Docker containers only when I talk about Elastic Container Service and Elastic Kubernetes Service. And this example is not talking about disaster recovery. But see, disaster recovery is also a part of fault tolerance. And what Docker is talking about, it is talking fault tolerance at a very, very specific level, at a very minute level, wherein if your container that is hosting a web page gets killed or gets overloaded for some reasons, then it might crash. But as soon as it will crash, you can configure it to basically launch another container with same configuration that will immediately take up the responsibilities and continue to host the web page. And you won't face any downtime in Docker containers.
So at the background somewhere it is containing the backup of whatever this container does, right? I mean everything regarding
You
this
have to
container there is a
configure
backup.
that. You have to configure that. So just like EC2, we have EBS volumes. We also have Docker volumes. So you can configure Docker volumes. I have shown you a very basic example. I have not shown you all the configuration that we'll be doing that because it is going to be a very long session in that case. Just a minute. So here it is showing no volume, but you can create volume by using this command docker volume create, and let me call my volume as httpd. So now I will have a volume that I now have a volume httpd that I can connect to my Docker container, which is this, and all the data that will be generated by this container can be saved to this particular volume. So all the options that are available on that we use EC2 are also available on Docker. It's just that you have to manage it differently.
Thanks, Prashant.
Okay. Any further questions on this or any clarifications? So I will, if there are no questions, I can show you the AWS service, which is ECS. So this is an AWS service which basically helps you deploy containers, but then it basically manages the background stuff for you. You don't have to deploy all the containers like this, provision a virtual server yourself and do that. It will manage all the background stuff for you. You just need to come to the task definition and you just need to select how you want to deploy. You want to go serverless or you want to deploy on server. So I will select EC2 for now. We won't be deploying any actual containers because that may take long here. But then I will show you how we can set up all that we did right now. So here it is asking you for details. So here you can name your task, what is that going to be. You can define the memory that your container should take, the CPU unit it should consume, and then the other things would be like you can even specify volumes. You can set, there are options like here add container definition, what it is asking. Yeah, so here it is asking for container image, all the things that we did just now. Here you can do port mappings. The port of host can be connected to the container port, which can be connected together. Then the traffic which is coming, which will come to the host, will be redirected to the container port. You can even specify the protocol here. So all the things you can use, but that is for your general understanding, because containers is something that is cutting edge in today's generation. Container has become a technology that majorly all the customers are using today. Like there is an exercise which is known as modernization. The companies are migrating from EC2 to containers because containers offers greater flexibility. They offer microservices architecture instead of monolithic. So that is one thing. And yeah, I have already also mentioned some of the advantages here. So like which is migration from monolithic architectures to microservices. Then we have modernization. It offers high availability, extreme fault tolerance, and as we have already shown today, it requires less compute memory or resources. So I think we have already covered that part. So any questions from anybody on containers or anything?
Prashant, the same thing you did, deploying a Docker container and launching the website, everything. I mean, can we Because I do not have much experience on Linux, so can I do it using AWS CLI?
Uh, no, I think AWS CLI might not allow you, because AWS CLI is just for accessing and doing your some basic stuff. But if you want to deploy a container, then I would suggest you to deploy a virtual server. And there is nothing much you can even follow. There are multiple blogs on Google that you can follow through. They will guide you. Otherwise, I can also share some of the links that you can follow through.
I mean, having Linux is must, or we can do it on Windows as well.
The Docker is also available on Windows, but again on Windows also, the commands would remain the same. The Docker commands that we use today would remain the same, because Docker is not a platform that you manage through a user interface, even on Windows. You have to manage through commands only. But if you
Okay.
want to try,
Okay.
then again, you can even try on Windows as well. But I have not actually deployed containers on Windows, so not much idea about that. But if you look on search on Google, then definitely you will get some good URLs.
It would be helpful, Prashant, if you can, give me some links so that I can understand Linux and install it and run all these things. I want to do it hands-on.
Okay, sure. I will look for some links and will share.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So if there are any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, we can proceed ahead. Okay, so Sidhu has asked, as far as I know, the port 80 is considered vulnerable security-wise. Is there a concept of port opening or blocking in cloud? So yeah, as Sindhu, 80 is not secure, because in production environment we don't use 80. We rather use 443, because HTTPS provides us certificates. So you can secure your port 80, like the traffic, through network access control list that we discussed today. Even you can use security groups. So you can use that. Any more questions? Okay, so no problem. So then let me give you some overview about the next session that we are planning for you. So we'll be having the next session on interview best practices, and will be delivered by Shefali Singhal, and who is an entrepreneur and the founder of Young Minds. So we have prepared this agenda where she'll be guiding you across the important uh, interview best practices, like what are the do's and don'ts, like how do you need to have your body language or facing a virtual physical interview, how do you basically need to prepare for the interview, and then what is social media presence, how can you enhance your confidence and all that. And post this, we are also planning some more sessions, and we might start with a session on microservices, and that will be a good learning for you as well. So Uh, I think now I will share this feedback link with you all. Please do take out a minute and please provide your valuable feedback. Sorry. Yeah, please use this link and provide your valuable feedback for today's session. That is going to help us improve. That is more critical, more crucial for our important improvement. So do take a minute out of your time and do submit the valuable feedback. And if
Thank you, Prashant. Thank you, Mukesh, for this beautiful session.
Thanks. So thank you, Rashmi. So do we have any further questions on today's session? Otherwise, we can then proceed ahead to wrap up this session with a little meditation exercise.
For all your feedback, your suggestions, and your participation. Please do let us know what other topics would be of interest or how we can serve you better. So we'll end this session with a thank you to Prashant, and we'll do a quick relaxation. In the previous two sessions, we did the theory, how to relax the mind. And we learned that one of the ways to relax the mind is to reduce the traffic of thoughts in our mind, because it is these thoughts, when a flood of thoughts comes through our mind, then we feel stress, we feel overwhelmed. And these thoughts then trigger more thoughts. So even though it's pin drop silence outside, but these thoughts which are flooding our mind, they create chaos, they create stress. So it is the spacing between the thoughts which create silence, and it gives us that spacing, that silence between the thoughts, give us a sense of peace and calmness within. So let's practice that again, because the more we do it with eyes open, uh, we get used to it. So, and it helps us to think better. It helps us to absorb better, right? So what we want to do is we want to take a positive thought and stay in that thought, right? We don't want to create too many thoughts. We want to create a thought and be in the presence of that thought, right? And then we reiterate that thought, and that's how we feel that our mind is relaxed, and we are in control of our mind. And even if thoughts come in, like Rocky was telling us before in the beginning of the section, let it go. Just be an observer, let it go, right? So let's create a positive thought, right? That uh, I'm powerful, I'm no less than anyone. It's a positive thought. That I'm a good learner, right? So let's create that one positive thought, I am a good learner, and stay in that thought, right? See how long you can hold that thought for. Any more thoughts that would come in, let it go, right? They will come and go. What comes will go, right? That's the law, right? Don't pursue it. Don't hold it. Don't think, why did it come? It will come, but don't give attention to it. Don't give your valuable time and your energy to these wasteful thoughts. Don't give your time and attention to these attention seeking thoughts. What comes will go. You just observe and enjoy the inner peace, the spacing between the thoughts and the silence, right? So let's create that thought. I am happy. So I'm happy, I'm learning, and I'm no less than anyone. Can we repeat the thought? I'm a good learner. I'm happy. I'm no less than anyone. And stay in the moment. I'm happy and I'm grateful. Like the picture. Our mind is like a field, right? The thoughts are like seeds. The more seeds we throw at it, the more they will grow. They will seek attention. So we have to be careful what we sow, because the thought It all starts with a single thought. Just like a small fire, a matchstick can burn down an entire forest. Same way, a negative thought, one negative thought, can burn down our productivity, can take our energy away. So watch these thoughts. Make sure you do not give any room to such negative thoughts that I cannot do this. This is difficult. Nothing is difficult if you are determined. Use the power of positive thoughts. Us creating a thought that we are capable of learning, we are no less than anyone, is not an imagination, but a realization that we are. We are smart, we are capable, we can learn new things, we are determined. Reiterating that thought gives us that power of determination and self belief that we can do what we choose to believe in and what we choose and decide to do. And one final thought: I am gracious and thankful for everything. The attitude of gratitude, right? It empowers us to be positive. So always remember, attitude of gratitude. Be thankful for what we have, or because we can always think about things that we don't have and be positive and focus on what we have. We have good health. We have the valuable time. The more you do this and the more you practice it, mind accepts this new reality, accepts that it is peaceful, it is happy within. It doesn't need to do a lot to experience it. It just needs to eliminate this noise and all this wasteful uh, thoughts that create this false illusion that we need a lot and we need to do a lot to be happy and feel the peace within. Thank you. That will end today's session. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you in our next session. Please, again, if you've not filled out the feedback form, do put your suggestions for what additional topics you would need. Your feedback is very important for us. Thank you again for all your participation.